Welcome back to Renovate Ed for the fourth installment in a series about mold. I'm your host, Jennifer Goldsby, and in this episode, I'm going to dive into a topic that too many homeowners don't think about until it happens to them. We're going to talk about mold remediation and the build back process. Before I bring in our guest, Mike of Guardian Angel Restoration, I want to share a little bit about my own personal experience with mold because if you've never been through it, you may not realize just how complicated and costly it can get, not just financially, but it's emotionally draining as well. The story starts a few years ago when I hired a general contractor to do window replacement. My windows were builder grade, they were very cold, there was a lot of wind coming through them. I was doing a big remodeling project and I included windows in that project as well. I ended up hiring somebody that came recommended to me by a friend, and that GC subbed the job out to a window manufacturer who then subbed it out again to laborers who did a very poor job with the installation. Thankfully, I had my remodeler on site and we were working inside on the home. He had experience with window installation and he kind of pulled me aside and said, Jennifer, look at what they're doing. They're not doing this, they're doing that. This is a problem. You need to go out, you need to talk to them. So I was really grateful for that guidance and for him pointing out those issues. They did not get resolved that same day. In fact, there's a whole story about the back door, the sliding door, and how they were going to leave a big old hole in the back of my house and call it a day on the job. But suffice it to say, it was one of the worst days of my life. I felt completely violated. We did get the hole in the back of the house filled. The window installation, did take place. And thereafter, there was howling from the wind, even worse than my original builder grade windows. It was really bad. And I thought, oh my goodness, I paid almost $10,000 for these windows. I don't know much about windows or window installation, but I do know brand new windows should not howl like that. And I had continued issues with the way that the trim work was done and caulking up weep holes. And it just took them a couple of years to fix it all properly to the point that I was no longer having any issues. And I know I was a frustrating client for them. And I have a feeling that they didn't believe me when I was saying that I had these issues. But the very last time they came out, my son had found this big pool of water in the front bedroom after a pretty hefty rainstorm. And I was like, okay, look, I do know that brand new windows should not bring pooling water into the house. So, oh goodness. Okay, so I was told that these windows, they're a very good quality, and it goes to show that you can have great materials, but if they're not installed by quality installers, you're going to have a problem. And I think even the reverse is true as well. So just a takeaway, there's so many lessons that I learned through this process. Here's another one. In Indiana, general workmanship only carries a 2-year warranty, and I didn't learn about the mold issue that this poor window installation had caused until 4 years after the original installation date. Unfortunately, that meant no legal recourse against the GC or his subs. And honestly, there was no way for me to know any earlier. I could not have known within that first couple of years. I only learned about this because I had gone through significant health decline. And through doctors and other medical professionals, we had ruled out a host of other potential causes. And then it just kept coming back to, are you sure you don't have mold in your home? So it took me 4 years, to develop this significant health decline to the point that I thought I was going to have to go into assisted living. It was that bad. And at that point, I buckled down and did a mold inspection on the home. And because it had taken so long, I obviously had no recourse against the GC, but also because the damage wasn't linked to a covered water event, insurance wouldn't cover it either. So I had no choice but to personally absorb all of the costs involved. I did have a good positive experience through this. It was with the remediation company that I hired. I hired Midwest Remediation to do the mold remediation. I know them through the Builders Association. Karr is always around. It's so ironic because I've heard her say a number of times that she would love to say that she gets calls from all of us, but typically when we call her, we're calling her because it's a pretty bad situation. And I had to chuckle to myself when I gave her a call because that was the deal. She's asking how you doing. I'm like, Karen, I could be doing better if I didn't have to call you. But she was very, very sweet, and her team did an amazing job. I had a wonderful experience with Midwest Remediation. Before I talked to her, I had hired a mold inspector, Joe Hensler of CIH Services LLC. He came out, he did the testing. I went so far as to have the walls tested. I was in such denial about mold being in my home because I'd recently remodeled it, within the past few years. And I personally did a lot of that work alongside my contractor. And I saw it every step of the way. I lived here, I lived through it. But the one piece of that remodeling project that always kind of nagged me in the back of my head was the window installation. So I did go so far as to have the walls tested. I did have him drill into the walls under each window and test. And sure enough, 6 out of the 8 windows had mold in the walls, and then the area by the sliding door had it as well. So Joe came out with CIH Services LLC. He did the testing, and then I hired Karen Karr with her team over at Midwest Remediation to do the remediation. They did the job in one day. It was a very long day for the crew. I was not on site, but they did a beautiful job. They sent me before and after photos, and they were in great communication. And then I had Joe go back out. Now, he had recommended I hire him to come back out between the remediation and the build back just to make sure there were no issues, so I didn't go through the exercise of putting the house all back together and then later realize I'm still having problems. And I'm grateful for the advice, and I did that. And even though he said he very rarely sees any issues with jobs done by Midwest Remediation, it would still be good to go out and to test. So we did, and it came back clean, and the remediation part of my nightmare went so smoothly. Unfortunately, the story did not end there. When it came to the build back process, putting my home back together, I ran into even more challenges. I don't know what the deal is. I am a magnet for bad contractors. Oh, my goodness. You think in my line of work I would know better, but I had reached out to several people I know and trust and asked if any of them can take on the job. Unfortunately, most of them were very busy with their current workload. I happened to go to a builders association meeting, and I was sitting next to someone there, and I was telling this person about my situation, and before I could get the whole story out, they said, "We will find a way to fit you in the schedule. We will take care of you." And I was so grateful for the help that I'm going to tell you guys, I didn't do what I would normally do and what I had previously learned the hard way, but apparently did not learn my lesson. I did not check references. I did not vet them in the same way that I would for my clients. And I really only scanned through what was a very lengthy contract. I did not read it word for word. What I would later discover, because the remodeler pointed it out to me, is that there was basically a gag order clause in their contract. And it wasn't until the project was very nearly completed and I came home to inspect it that I discovered the work was subpar. I could probably spend an hour talking to you about how bad it looked. I'm not too proud to tell you that I came home and I cried pretty heartily that day. You could visibly see where the drywall was installed. It was so obvious. The texture job was really, really bad. It was very poorly done. Corners were very, very sloppy. I mean, I could just go on and on and on. I have a sensitivity to chemicals. I made it very clear that I didn't want to come back to the home until everything was done and dried. On the way home, I get a text. "Oh, by the way, there's some wet texture in the front bedroom." And it's like, seriously, I'm halfway through a 2.5 hour drive on my way home, and I'm just now getting this message that I'm going to come home to chemicals. And how is that possible? Because you can't paint wet texture. And you told me that the job was done, except for the tiling in the kitchen. You told me the job was done. So how is it possible that I've got wet texture in a bedroom if the job is done and it's been painted? I mean, that's just, red flag number 100 of this whole ordeal. So I come home, and honestly, guys, I walk through the house, open up the door, and it was just so wet and musty. I had to buy an extra dehumidifier. I had to run that for weeks to get the humidity out of the place. And it really made me question, what did they do here? Did they spray texture on top of wet drywall mud? Did they paint wet texture? Like, what happened here? It was really quite sad. Again, I could go on and on and on. But that wasn't enough to add insult to injury. In the days that followed, that I was home and I was scrubbing my house from floor to ceiling, and friends came over. I had this host of friends that came over. They're so very lovely, and they helped me, and we literally scrubbed floor to ceiling. I found more and more damage. They had caused damage in areas of the home. They weren't hired to do work. They failed to protect my belongings. They didn't properly cover them. So my home and everything in it was covered in construction dust. They didn't protect the HVAC unit and the ductwork. I had to have that professionally cleaned, which I would have had done anyway, but it was really, really bad. It was very difficult to breathe in the home. Inside furniture, inside my personal belongings. I've just sold my house and took the paintings and wall coverings off the wall, and behind each one of them, I didn't even think of at the time that friends and I were cleaning my house, I didn't think to take the stuff off the walls and wipe down the back of it. But as I'm taking things off of the wall, the back of it's just covered in construction dust. It was really insane. I could not believe. I mean, I lived through renovation projects before. I know there's going to be construction dust, but this is like caked on grime. It was really bad. And so I unfortunately had to part with virtually all of my furniture. I kept my work desk and a chair because it was in the office and the office was taped off. But all of my other furniture I had to part with, and many other personal possessions. And the financial toll of all of this was just crushing. Think of it, I had at least up to the past year. And honestly, when I look back at my personal medical journal, I was having medical troubles at the end of 2021, beginning of 2022. So I'd had these medical issues, and looking back, they were just kind of compiling until this past year. It was too much. My body couldn't handle it. And so think of all of the medical bills and expenses and the alternative therapies that I was doing, and then the remediation costs and hiring and firing one remodeler and then hiring a replacement contractor to redo as much of the work as possible because it had been done so poorly. It completely depleted my savings, and it left me $26,000 in debt. I could have taken a dose of my own medicine and refinanced my home with a renovation loan to cover the remediation and the repair costs, but it wouldn't have made me whole with my medical bills and expenses. And quite frankly, my house, small as it is too big for me. I'd been wanting to simplify for some time anyway. So I made a decision to go ahead and sell the house. And, here I am. I've now, quote unquote, lost my house. I'll never make back what I've put into it. I'm not going to break even, but I've lost my house. I've lost my personal belongings, my furniture, not everything. I still have my silverware and dishes and glasses and clothes and, some small things, but I've lost so much. And so I share this story not for sympathy. I'm okay. Life's good to me. I'm fine. I'm going to survive this. But I share it to shed light on the reality that homeowners face when things go wrong. If it can happen to me, and I work with contractors every day, it can happen to you. And so I want to emphasize why the remediation and the rebuild phases, they require the right team, very clear contracts, transparency. And if you can learn anything from my experience, the takeaway here is don't rush into things. Take your time, do it right, which is to say very thoroughly vet any contractor you intend to hire and check their references. Do as I say, not as I do. Sorry. With that, I'd like to introduce a guest, Mike Talbot with Guardian Angel Restoration. Mike has helped countless homeowners through mold remediation and the rebuild process, and he is just a wealth of information. He knows the pitfalls homeowners can avoid and the best practices they should take. So take a listen to Mike's words of wisdom. Enjoy. Mike, thanks for joining the conversation today about mold.
Absolutely, Jennifer. It's a pleasure to be here.
Got to be everybody's favorite topic.
It's a heavy-hearted topic. It's not taken easily. A lot of times using scare tactics and all that, but it's a topic that is often misrepresented and needs to be talked about, and people need to be educated and brought to light about things.
Yes, and I would say underdiagnosed as well. The more I learn about this, the more I am shocked by how frequent mold exposure happens within residential homes here in the U.S.
Yes, it is. It's everywhere. I mean, it's in our natural environment that we live in, but inside our homes is not where it needs to be, and that often indicates that you've had some type of leak happening within your home, and due to that long-term exposure of that water, it has turned into a microbial growth that can or cannot be toxic to your health.
Yeah. And before I went through a personal experience with mold, I would have assumed that mold happens when you have a big event, like a tree falls on your house, or you've got an old roof that's leaking or something like that. So, can you maybe share with myself and the audience what kind of water events require remediation beyond the obvious things like the leaking roofs and the flooded basements?
Yeah, absolutely. Because that is often a misconception because while roofing leaks and basement floodings are common, many losses stem from it can be an HVAC condensation line that's clogged or frozen. You can have ice damming due to poor insulation and ventilation to your attic. You can have improper grading around the foundation of your home. You can have appliance failures. It can be a dishwasher, a water heater. So often these can be minor water intrusions that can create serious problems if not addressed in the 24 to 48 hours. So that's why we make it very well known that you have a limited amount of time when this is inside your home, and time is of an essence, and you need to make the proper steps to ensure that you're protecting your home, and always looking out for what should not be inside your home, and mold is definitely 100% something that you should not find within your home and growing.
Yeah, that's interesting that you said 24 to 48 hours because me, prior to this event, and I suspect most homeowners probably think if I've got a little bit of water somewhere, it's a minor issue. I'll wipe it up, it'll be fine. If it comes back, I'll just keep cleaning it. So you're saying even when the issue appears to be minor, it needs to be addressed right away within 24, 48 hours?
100%, because as that water absorbs into the material, what's going to happen is you're going to have rot or decay, and that's going to be the ongoing issue, and what helps regenerate mold and then cause it to sporulate and become a bigger issue is that ongoing issue. So why things may be small and minute, and you may think you can, let me just wipe that off. It'll be fine. Like,
Mhm.
absolutely not. Like, this is a small issue now. It's just like a snowball. I mean, you're letting it roll down the hill, and eventually that it's going to roll big enough to make a serious impact, and not only your home, but hopefully not your health.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that any kind of water intrusion, water leaks, they're best to get taken care of right away because the issue is not going to get better, it's only going to get worse.
A
Yeah.
pipe isn't going to start just fixing itself. Some type of seal, some type of gasket, some type of intrusion has now penetrated through the material, through your roof, through something within your home. So some type of maintenance issue has happened. It doesn't matter if you're a new home, an existing home, or whatever. Everything has a shelf life, and you need to maintain those shelf lives. So when you find a small indicator, such as a small leak or something, that should trigger into our minds like, hey, we need to get this taken care of by the professionals so that we can mitigate the loss and not be so stunned a year later when
Yeah.
something finally bursts and gives away, and now you have what the insurance company would call a negligible claim because you knew about it and you let that ongoing issue go on and not address it.
Yeah. Okay, so you touched on mitigation. Let's go down that path. I've spoken with your colleague Nikki, and I've heard from her that the state of Indiana it has low remediation standards in comparison to neighboring states. Can you provide a little color on that?
Yeah, unfortunately, Indiana does lack licensing requirements for mold remediation, unlike our neighboring states like Illinois. And this is what opens the door for undertrained and non-compliant contractors to get into the game. And it makes it extremely hard for the companies that are, being ethical, that know the standard and know where the level of service should be for the client to adhere this, because other people are cutting the corners and doing everything, brushing it off, throw some paint over it, and not doing the necessary steps. So when people see an estimate from one to the other, and we're writing to the standard versus somebody writing, for the quick fix that doesn't know what they're doing, they're just looking at the bottom line figure versus the scope of work. So by making this basically voluntary adherence to the ISCRC and mold regulations, it is important. It's extremely important. And these standards are widely accepted by courts and insurers as a standard of care in the absence of formal regulations. So it just emphasizes again, like this is important. Other states have noticed this, and just right now Indiana just is not there. But that's why I am speaking about it. I'm advocating about it. I'm teaching people what the IICRC stands for, and why it's so important to make sure that the firm that you're working with is an accredited firm within restoration, and has the mold certificate in within that specialization, and can truly take care of you, and not just do, again, the quick fix. I'm just doing something to get a bottom line dollar, versus I'm doing something to protect the health and safety of my client and take care of their most valued asset, which is their home.
And prevent it from happening again. I can relate a little bit to that, because when I started the mortgage industry, there were no licensing requirements, and it was the Wild West. And fast forward a few years, and laws changed, regulations changed. Now we are licensed, and it's really cleaned up the mortgage industry. So I'm hopeful that it'll clean up the mold remediation industry as well. Pun intended, I guess.
I mean, the whole construction industry is unregulated. You don't even have to have a contractor's license. A lot of cities, you don't even have to have an electrical license to do electrical work. So there's a lot of other areas within the construction world outside of mold that just are not there. But that doesn't mean we don't need to speak about it, because we need to advocate for safety and adherence, and especially when it comes to microbial growth and mold, and that being within our home.
That speaks to me, because there's very little recourse for a homeowner like me who has had a mold issue due to shoddy workmanship. There's nothing I can do to go after that contractor, because it's past that 2-year workmanship warranty, general workmanship warranty that the state of Indiana has. And it's like, look, I had windows replaced, and I had no idea that there was water intrusion in the walls, and it took years for that medical issue to surface. So I never would have caught it within that first 2 years. So I'm right there with you. We need more protection.
Yeah, I mean, mold's not always seen. A small roof leak may, just start penetrating. It gets the insulation contaminated. It starts dripping into the ceiling, but then again, that's always not prevalent right off the get-go. So sometimes you can't always stop it. But again, going back to what we talked about earlier, as soon as you see the first sign, like, we need to investigate. We need to get onto it, because we don't know how long this has been happening. We don't know how many other affected areas that could be happening. So we need to make sure that we're doing the proper testing and our due diligence of scoping the job, to make sure that we're handling the job in the right way.
Yeah. That example that you gave of a roofing leak that you can't see right away, I have to imagine something like that would probably be covered by homeowners insurance. But I'm going to ask the question because I think you told me this previously, that you're unfortunately the front line when it comes to insurance, and the first person to identify when somebody is underinsured. So can you share maybe a little of your experiences working with insurance companies?
Yeah, mold is a very touchy subject, and at the end of the day, I'm not a hygienist. I can't say whether something's mold or not. I can say yes, based off my experience, that it appears to be microbial growth. So when speaking about that word, mold, that is typically within the insurance world is going to become a rider, and most people don't know that, because it's going to go under your rot and fungi for deterioration, which is considered long-term leakage or seepage. So some insurance companies will say, hey, if you don't have that rider, you have no coverage, because we are looking at it from a negligence standpoint, that because it took time for that mold to grow, you did not, you were not reactive enough to it, that we're going to go ahead and deny that, because it should have never got that far, and you let this carry on. So it's more of a blame game, and pushing, I guess, the responsibility onto the homeowner, because oftentimes some of the stuff isn't you can't stop it from happening. So for instance, I had a dishwasher one time that was leaking into a crawl space. So underneath the dishwasher, as soon as that subfloor gets wet, it leaks into the crawl space.
Yeah.
Well, The homeowner doesn't. You don't go crawling through your crawl space doing a check. That's just not
Sure.
something that people do. Well, because it took so long for that small leak to actually get out into a area that you could visibly see, which ended up swelling the subfloor to the point where it pushed up the flooring outside of the where the dishwasher lays. And then she made the call. She said, "Hey, my subfloor has been swollen. My flooring's coming up. I need some help." Well, that's where we kind of came in, scoped it out, and figured out like, hey, this actually has been going on for probably at least a month. It is engulfed underneath your dishwasher. Your cabinets are swelling on the inside, and you got a very serious problem. And then in the crawl space, it was all on the underside of the joist, the subfloor. But to her, she didn't know until it came out from the cabinet side.
Mm.
So yes, she had mold, but there is no negligible thing there when you dive into the story of what happened and just how it did happen. And in some instances, they don't care. They won't listen to the story. It's not a rider, and you're on your own. So you really need to know and go through your policy and make sure that you got the correct riders, that are going to be mold and fungi. Another rider that gets breaks my heart is sewage and backup, and people are 9 times out of 10 mostly underinsured for it. And they'll have a fully finished basement, it'll flood. And let's say they're gone on vacation for a week and they come back and there's 2 feet of water, they got mold everywhere, lost all their contents. They call in and they find out, well, you only got a $5,000 sewer backup rider and that's all you have. And now you got a fully finished basement, all your contents, you have a mold situation, a flood, and now they just gave you 5 grand and said, have a good day.
Going through this event, I had no idea there was even such a thing as a rider to cover mold events. So moving forward, you better believe I'm going to have that. And it is great information for homeowners out there. So I'm glad that you shared that. Moving forward into the remediation piece, I'm not necessarily going to ask you to break down what you do during remediation, but I know that I've heard you talk about air filtration devices, use of those, or air scrubbers. Can you talk a little bit about those tools?
Following OSHA compliance and the IICRC, it requires us restorers to use air filtration devices when we do remediation. So it is an OSHA regulation as well as an IICRC regulation. So, and this is oftentimes something that is missed because it'll be it's an additional piece of equipment or it'll be used improperly. People do not know how to use an air filtration device, when to have it in static mode versus negative mode, and how to tailor that. So again, there's a lot of education that goes behind properly knowing how to use them, as well as the different ways you can use them. There are other ways to actually control the environment too by using different various tools. So ourselves will use drywall saws, and these drywall saws hook up to our HEPA vacuums. So as we're cutting the drywall, all of the dust and particulate and silica dust is sucked through our tubes into our HEPA vacs and filtered through that. So instead of all of that dust and debris getting all over the affected area and contaminating our room more than it already is, we're using controlled measures to reduce the air quality and what we're pushing into the air and mitigate that so that we're being more thorough on our mold remediation. So you have use of just air filtration devices, you have tools, and then you're going to have containment, building the proper containment within the chamber and making sure that any accesses that could be outside that chamber are shut off, the doorways are shut off, HVAC vents are taped off, anything that could cross contaminate outside of the working area, that you are properly taking care of, removing contents from those areas. If you're working within a kitchen and you can't empty the cabinets, taping all those cabinets up. There's a lot of preventative measures to make sure that you're not cross contaminating your clean areas versus your exit areas. So you got to just know what you're doing in this industry and know the controllable measures and the various different controllable measures, so that again you're taking care of the client and making sure that their health and safety is at the highest priority.
There's a couple things I'm taking away from that. One, it sounds to me like a DIY job is going to be incredibly difficult to do, and someone should not attempt it unless they have the proper equipment. Would you agree?
I would 100% agree. And I wouldn't even recommend DIY, mold remediation jobs, for you to do it. It's again, there's too many variables. There's too many cross contaminations. There's no guarantees that you had the necessary training and knowledge that you got all the mold. There's no validation from a hygienist that verifies that what you done was actually effective. It's just so many steps, and people just often again think, oh yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and throw some Kills paint on it and move on. Well, there may be some other contributing factors. I mean, these are microscopic organisms, so that may be the visible part, but it may be a much bigger problem once we do an air quality test and we can actually track down what else could be going wrong in this environment and get all the proper knowledge to make a proper assessment and do our job the right way.
Yeah. So the second thing I was taken away from that is that there are certain safety measures taken to protect the inhabitants of the home, and I assume the workers as well. And you named a couple of them. I wouldn't mind hearing if there's anything else that people can do, any kind of other measures they can do to protect health, maybe after remediation and repair.
The post protocols is always going to be make sure that your house is protected from outdoor elements. You're doing maintenance checks. You're doing some preventative measures that can protect your home from being exposed. For instance, a hose spigot. In the springtime, that's our number one call because most people don't know to winterize your hose spigots, on the outside of your house through the winter so that it doesn't freeze up. And then you go to use it in the spring and boom, your basement's flooded because that pipe has bursted, from it not being properly winterized. That's a big one that we talk about. Making sure that you have battery backups, for your sump pumps, protecting your basements. You're talking about sump pump that's, less than $2,000 that you're gonna have to replace every 6-7 years. They may say 10 years or something like that. I don't like to push the limit. I would rather replace it at 7 and spend my deductible on ensuring that my basement and my assets are protected than push the limit and replace it when it fails and then have to make a claim once Lord knows what would happen to your house. Water sensors is another one. Putting water sensors by your water heater, by your washing machine, underneath your sinks, by toilets, stuff like that are going to trigger and notify someone that, hey, there's something happening and this should not be going on. And going back to the water sensors, when you do hear that is, hey, do you know where your water shutoff valve is in your home? Do you know how to shut off your water? If something happened, would you know or would your family know?
No, I would not.
You're not alone. And that's often asked. And I'll hit people in trade shows and I'll be handing these out, and the husbands they'll blow me off, and I'll ask the direct question. I was like, does your wife know? And she'll look at him with the stank eye, and I'll look back and I'll smile. I say, sounds like you need to prevent yourself from getting a frustrating call down the road when your wife is screaming, she has no idea how to turn off the water, and as everything's getting worse in your home and you're getting frustrated because you never explained where this was. It's just, let's be proactive instead of reactive, and that's the approach we're taking. We want to be there, to guide you during the time of need and traumatic experience, but we also want to be there to prevent that from happening.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a lot of preventative maintenance. I know for myself, after the remediation took place and after the repairs have been completed, I had my ductwork clean as well. Now, I don't know if the remediators shut off the AC when they did their job or covered the vents or whatever, but I can almost guarantee that the contractor who came in and did the repair work did not, which was really disappointing to me.
Right, right. And again, it's just another measure that is often missed because people are not trained to do this stuff. They don't think about it. They're there to, let me just clean ducts and move on. They're not thinking about setting an air filtration device to protect the environmental controls. They're just not thinking about these things because they're not certified. They're not trained. No one has sat down with them and explained it to them. So you're not going to know it until someone tells you. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. Now, on my project, a remediator came in and they did their job and they did it within a day. And as far as I know, they did an excellent job. That was the feedback that I had gotten. So I had a mold test done before the remediation. The remediation occurred. And then after that, I had the home tested for mold again. And I used a third party tester, which I'm assuming is ideal. Can you speak to third party testing and why it's so important?
Oh, 100%. And third party testing is the only way, to go. Having the verification done by a professional third party that doesn't have vested interest in your project, because that's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid conflict of interest. And your restoration guy his interest is to make sure that your house is mold free. So we want to make sure that, hey, there's a third party ensuring that the health and safety of your house is validated, stamped, not just by the same person doing it. So you wanna have independent data that ensures that your house has been verified. So you have that peace of mind at the end of the day, because it's one thing for the remediator to be like, yep, it's all gone and look at this, and you see it and it's pretty and all that. But it's another thing to know that the things that you can't see, the air quality test, the double checking from a third party validates that's peace of mind. And
Mhm.
that's integrity. And no company that does mold remediation should be testing their own work, because again, that's a conflict of interest.
Yeah, I agree. And that's good advice. So, as we wrap up our conversation here, are there any other suggestions you would give homeowners to prevent water events from happening? Anything we haven't already talked about?
Yeah, I mean, just there's and going back to kind of our things when we were talking about the beginning, the water intrusion, stuff like that. Just maintaining. I like to tell people 6 inches of clearance between where your mulch and your siding and foundation are. So your foundation wall rests up here, and that's where your siding starts. Well, your mulch should be down here. It should not be up here where it's deteriorating at that wall. And then anytime you have water that intrudes, well, if it's at the top of your wall, what's going to go over it? So we want to make sure that we are maintaining the grading of your yard and ensuring that grading is going away, as well as it is not high up on that wall, causing it to go under. We don't want the water to peek into the house. We want the water to go away from the house, and that's why we're going to recommend that you have downspouts that are going at least 10 to 14 feet from your home, because again, the more water that's sitting on the outside of your home, the more hydrostatic pressure that's being applied, and the more susceptible you're going to be for foundation cracking and problems to happen. The number one thing with basements that I just stress about, I talked about a little earlier, is battery backups. Making sure you have that battery backup. Just 3 weeks ago, I was up in Morris Reservoir, multi-million-dollar mansions. All three of them didn't have a battery backup. They lost power, and I would have never been to either of those jobs, or either three of those jobs, if they would have just simply had the necessary protection measures there to make sure that their assets are taken care of. So $1 million home to $100,000 ranch, it doesn't matter. You got to have the proper protective equipment to ensure your property is taken care of. And going back to the shutoff valves, making sure that you and the people watching your home near and dear know where that is. If you're going on vacation, shut it off. Like, you don't need to have your water running through your house. Like, you're asking for a problem. So if you know where your shutoff valve is, shut it off, drain your faucets, and you'll be fine. And then when you get back, kickstart everything back up. It's okay. Get with your plumber if you need instructions on how to do that, to make sure you're not frying your water heater and all that. He can walk you through it. But again, you got to know where the pieces of the puzzle are in your home to protect your assets. And then finally, using smart leak detectors, putting those around your house and making sure that if something does happen, that you're being alerted. Because if we're trusting our eyes, well, that only goes so far. My eyes aren't downstairs in the basement looking around the water heater. My eyes aren't behind the washing machine in my upstairs laundry room, catching that. So there's a lot of things that something could, small could happen. And again, we're being proactive instead of reactive, which is the whole part of preventative tips. So that when I get there, I can help clean up a small loss versus, oh my gosh, if I would have known my washing machine was leaking yesterday, this would have been a simple remediation on my second floor. But because I didn't know it, I ran through 3 more cycles. My kids kept doing laundry, and now my first floor is flooded. It's raining everywhere. Oh my gosh.
Nobody wants that.
No.
And I gotta ask, those $1 million homes that you worked on, do they now have backup power supply to their sub pumps?
Oh yeah. Oh
Okay,
yeah.
good.
They had plumbers there that next day putting
Good.
in these battery backups because and that was just the heartbreaking part of it. Outside of finding out that 2 of them were underinsured and didn't have enough backup insurance, so you got $100,000+ basement and you have a $25,000 cap.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking to know that now they're going to have to come out of pocket for all that additional money because they got a 3,000 square foot basement with $25,000 of coverage. That is not enough, especially if it, Lord forbid, if it would have been you're on vacation, if it would have got worse, and now we're flood cutting, we're tearing out stuff. You have contents that are affected because that's often people don't know that either. Your contents is part of your rider for a backup. So if your basement floods, it's $5,000 for the basement and your contents.
That doesn't get you very far at all.
No, it brings tears and it breaks my heart.
Yeah.
And I often end up looking like the bad person because they're like, oh my gosh, your bill's crazy and I only have this amount of money, but it's your fault because you're too expensive. And I'm writing in the industry standard. I'm writing in an insurance program that pushes out a price, pamphlet every month that keeps me compatible with the other restoration companies. So my pricing is not different. I'm always speaking the same language. We just need to make sure we're talking about the same scope of work. And that's why it's so important that you're educated.
And I hope that this podcast episode helps to drive that communication, drive that education to the homeowners because it is much needed.
100%. And I have been preaching on it. I've done many seminars on it. I've gone to a school to speak about this stuff. And again, we need to all keep talking about it, keep making it a top of mind product because our health and safety is important. We got one life. There's no like restart button. There's no like, oh, I wish I would have worn my mask for all those years. And that's what I tell my guys. Proper PPE, guys. Wear the suit, wear the mask. It's not just inhalation that we have to worry about. We have skin absorption. We have all different types of contamination factors that you have to be mindful of that all can affect our bodies in a different way.
Yes, I have a new appreciation for that now after having gone through this.
It's experiences like yours that break my heart because wow, yeah, I feel for you.
Yeah, it's okay. At least I found out what was causing the health problems. We solved it. Life goes on. So it's all good here. And I got to tell you, through that experience, I have learned so much, obviously from going through it myself, but also from the professionals around me. So I want to thank you for sharing your knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, knowledge is power. I mean, you wouldn't go to a mechanic without knowing they're ASC certified, would you?
Well, I don't know what that means, but maybe some guys out there do.
No, so it's just a state requirement that they permit. They require mechanics to get certified within like brakes, transmissions, there's a whole category. And if you walk into a mechanic shop, you'll see all these sort of ASE certifications blasting them, just saying their mechanics are have taken the state requirement test, and they're certified. They hold that proud and loud. And it's amazing. And it's like walking into a doctor's office. You see that they've passed their boards and they're certified. They've done what they've got to do to be an advocate for that industry. And that's what I'd love to see in mold remediation is you see the IICRC certifications. Homeowners know to ask for that and be like, oh, well, you do water, fire, mold, trauma scene cleanup, crime scene cleanup, meth labs. They know to ask for that certification to validate that the person in front of them is the correct person to handle that, because again, it's a collateral effect, right towards your health and safety.
Yeah, I agree. If I were speaking my language, I probably would say I would never hire a realtor who wasn't licensed, or I would never obtain a mortgage from a broker or banker who wasn't properly licensed. So, yeah, it makes sense that I wouldn't hire a mold remediator who isn't licensed.
No, you won't. You never will. And your conversation from here on out will always be preaching that.
Yes, it will. Well, Mike, thanks so much for joining the conversation, for sharing your knowledge. If there are those out there who have a need to go through any kind of remediation, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, give us a call, 317-764-2375, or you can follow us on guardianangelrestoration.com. You can follow us on Facebook as well at Guardian Angel Restoration. And, we're here. We're part of the community. We're an advocate for you, and we'd love to serve you in any way possible.
And you work with a lot of veterans, right?
Yes, work with a lot of veterans and most importantly, a lot of nonprofits, as in 10% of everything we do is tied to some type of local nonprofit initiative. So we are very faith driven, very community driven. And actually just 2 weeks ago, we launched our 501(c) Crossroads Rising. So we now have an official 501(c) that we're fueling and getting ready to really make some huge impacts within the community.
Well, congratulations on that accomplishment. I wish you very well.
It's a blessing. Thank you.
Big thanks to Mike Talbot of Guardian Angel Restoration for joining me in this episode and helping all of us to better understand what we can expect during mold remediation and the build back process. If you've ever wondered how to choose the right team and avoid some of the pitfalls that I've experienced, I hope this conversation gave you the tools and confidence you need. In the next and final episode of this mold series, I'm going to be opening up about my own struggles after remediation. Even when the mold was removed, my health challenges didn't just disappear. I'm going to share some insights from an environmental hygienist who helped me to unpack more about mold spores and mycotoxins. It's going to be eye-opening, especially if you've ever wondered why symptoms linger even after remediation. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Until then, I'm Jennifer Goldsby, and this is Renovate Ed.